to sit down.
I am starting on time, one, because I want to make sure I get through everything and still leave enough time to either ask questions throughout the presentation or at the very end of the presentation. So are you guys ready to rock?
Yeah.
All right, I hope you are. I'm really excited to be here with you today. I'm going to be talking to you about finding and attracting guests for your podcast. And I'd like to relate this topic to relationships. So with that being said, do we have any podcasting virgins who haven't launched yet? No? Okay, we have some. We have anyone that's been podcasting for maybe a year or less? Okay, we still have some newbies. Anybody that's been podcasting for more than a year? Okay, so we have some experienced people as well. And my goal here with this presentation is to share information that will showcase different tips and strategies that can be used at different stages of your podcasting journey. So first I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. In August of 2014, I made the decision to start a podcast. I had a launch date set for myself of January 1st, 2015. I had a strategy all mapped out of what I was going to do for the months leading up to it. But January 1st came and went, and there was no podcast. So I actually launched in April of 2015. Does anybody want to guess why I was 4 months late?
You're an accountant.
No. Anybody else guess?
You were trying to make it perfect before you started?
Not quite.
You were trying to figure out the editing and the technology stuff?
No, not quite.
You were afraid of speaking up and having people hear what you had to say?
Not quite, but close.
Yeah, hard time getting guests.
What did you say?
Yeah, it's essentially the same thing.
Hard time getting guests. Close.
You didn't think your guests were good enough?
I'm running through all the things here.
Waiting on guest schedules?
No, but I'm going to give it to this young lady in the promos, just as close as we're going to get. It wasn't the issue of finding them, it was the issue of being too scared to reach out to them. So I have a gift here for you. I'm going to toss it. Oh, I pass it. And that was what my fear was actually reaching out to people and asking for the interview. And so that paralyzed me for 4 months. So now it's November 2015. I'm the host of Escaping Cubicle Captivity. I've released 60 episodes, and at this point, I'm about 13,000 downloads for my podcast. And I want to talk about the very first aspect of reaching out and attracting guests. Yes, I did not even make this up. Somebody showed it to me. I didn't even do this. So I was like, oh wow, he spelled my name right. You want to be attractive. And when you're looking to date and meet someone and you're looking to break the ice, you want to make sure that you don't have green stuff stuck in your teeth. You want to make sure your breath smells good. So you want to be attractive. And with being attractive, that starts with communication. How do you talk about your podcast? And oftentimes when you're talking about this venture that you're on, you will use words that belittle or demean it. And I know this because I did this last night when I talked about my t-shirt business. I was saying I have this little, hold up, I'm about to talk about this tomorrow. You don't refer to your business, your venture, your project, or whatever it is you're working on by using things like, oh, I got this little podcast that I'm working on, or I'm gonna give this podcast thing a try. When you use words like that, it shows that you don't have confidence in what it is you're working on. So when you talk about your podcast, you want to talk about it with a level of confidence. And this is important for a number of reasons. One, you may be talking to a potential guest, but two, you may be talking to someone who will refer you to a potential guest. So if you seem unsure, they're going to be unsure about being a guest, and they're going to be unsure about referring you to potential guests. The next thing you want to do is make sure you have a website. There are a lot of people who will ask, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? You need a website, especially if you're looking to have guests on your show. The reason is they will do research. They're going to check you out. They want to find out who this no-name person is asking me for an interview. And so when they're looking to do that research, you want to point them in the right direction. So you tell them this is where you go to find out about me. If you don't point them in the right direction, they're going to go Google you. And they're going to see whoever has the same name. They're going to see that blog you started a year ago and you stopped after 3 months. They're going to find whatever else they can find, and they're going to formulate an opinion based on other people's information. You want them to formulate their opinion based on your information. So you point them in the right direction. The other thing is it gives you some level of credibility. They understand that you have invested in this podcast. You have spent money, you've spent time to make sure that you have it presented correctly. So you want to definitely have a website. The next thing you want to do is start working on your social media. Do not wait until you launch to start working on social media. Start working on it in advance. One, because you want to start building that following so that when you do launch, you have people to share your podcast with. But also your potential guests will be looking at that because I do research social media. When I look for a guest, I'm looking at their Twitter. I'm looking at Facebook. I'm checking them out in all areas. So people will check that out as well. And if they see that you're active, you're engaging, they may have more confidence in dealing with you because they see that you are being active versus someone who's just dormant, asking for a random podcast interview. So the first step is to be attractive, but you definitely want to avoid certain people. And this happens especially when you are new to podcasting. The first thing you want to do is avoid people who are unfamiliar with podcasting. And this was one of my very first mistakes. I pitched a bunch of people who met the criteria, but they had no idea what podcasting was. They were not familiar with it. And although I had personally done business with each of them, spending hundreds of dollars with each of them, no one booked. So my credibility as a person to person, as a consumer, wasn't enough. Because when people do not understand what it is you're doing, they're not going to take action. So you want to target people who are familiar with podcasting. You also want to avoid the people who do not meet the basic tech requirements. And oftentimes I will see people ask a question in a Facebook group, well, what do I do because they don't have Skype and they don't want to download it? You have to weigh the pros and cons of having this person on your show. Are they that important that you're willing to try to use a platform or a software that you're not familiar with, that you don't know how to operate, that you are not confident in their sound quality to accommodate this one guest? And you also want to avoid the divas. And this is something that I've run into more recently. These are people who want to tell you that this disclaimer you got, that's not going to work. Well, you know what? If you're not Oprah, I'm not making that exception for you. If it's Oprah, I'm talking to a tin can with a string hanging up the bottom, you know what I'm saying? But I'm not going to do that for Tanya. No, forget it. Sorry, next time, maybe sometime in the future. We're not going to have that conversation. So the reason why you want to avoid these people is they are big time sucks. They will take up a lot of your time before you even book the interview. So you want to avoid these individuals if possible, not because they're bad, but because they will take up a lot of your time. Now, where are the best places to find guests? Everywhere. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but I have met guests everywhere. So this is just a sampling of the people that I've met. And just to highlight one of them, in Facebook groups, I met Adrienne Dorison. She posted, and feel free to screenshot it, she posted, I paid off over $40,000 in debt, quit my job, and started a business in 6 months. Eyebrows raised? My eyebrows were back here. I literally wanted to talk to this woman. Facebook message right away. I want to interview you. We booked the interview. So these are all great places to find guests for your show. They're everywhere. It's just a matter of keeping your eyes open and realizing that guests are in abundance. Not scarcity, abundance. I find guests everywhere and I just go for it. Now, when you're looking to pitch a guest, oftentimes you're going to be pitching this person either in person or you're going to be pitching them in writing. If you're going to pitch them in person, you're often starting a conversation with them. And so you're trying to find out a little bit more about this person. And in doing so, you may find that this person might be an ideal guest. And once you get that inkling, it's time to start asking some questions. You want to probe. You want to qualify them as a guest for your show, like I did with Zephyr at Podcast Movement. You start asking questions and then you make the pitch. It doesn't have to be a full-blown pitch, but you make the pitch to say, hey, I'm interested in having you as a guest on my show. So you make that pitch, but then you follow up officially with a formal invitation. And email is usually the way that most people do it, and so that's what I use. So you want to make sure you follow up in writing. And when you follow up in writing, and if you are following up with someone who you've met in person, you want to remind them where we met. we met here, we talked about this. Because at conferences like this, you meet a ton of people, you don't remember anyone's name. So you want to make sure you remind them of where you met. So that's the very first thing if you're following up with someone that you met in person. But if you're sending out a cold email, you want to start with a compliment. And just like dating, you don't want to come with that, ooh, you have a nice smile. That's so generic, anybody can say that. I mean, is it genuine? You want to come with a very genuine compliment, so you want to be specific. Hey, I bought your book, and in chapter 3 on page 5, you said this, and this stood out to me. Or, I bought your course, and I used it to do this, and these were my results. You want to be very specific when you pay that compliment. So you want to start off with the compliment. It also lets them know that this is not a canned template. Even though part of it can be canned, the very first paragraph should not be canned. It should be very specific to the person that you're inviting to be a guest on your show. And they will recognize that, and that will make it stand out. You also want to tell them a little bit about your show. What is it about? And then tie it into why you feel they are a good fit for your show. So you want to let them know, this is what my show is about, but you know what, this is why I feel you are a good fit for it. And once you do that, you want to start telling them about the benefits. And this is something that you can do even as a new podcaster. What are the benefits of being on my show? One is you get increased exposure. Even if you are brand new starting out, whoever's on your show, there's somebody who hasn't heard of them. So if that's one extra person, that's increased exposure. So they're going to get increased exposure. You want to let them know that you're going to be sharing this on your social media platforms. That's why it's important to start your social media early and not wait until the last minute. You want to let them know that I'm going to be sharing this information across my social media platforms. If you have a social media following, even if it's sizable, say you have a 5,000, 10,000 social media footprint, let them know that. That gives you some credibility in terms of your reach, in terms of publicizing and sharing this information with your community. You also want to let them know that if you are on multiple platforms in terms of the distribution of your podcast, if you're on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, TuneIn, front door, back door, upstairs, around the corner, you don't have to name them all out, but you can say I'm on A, B, and 15 others. It lets them know, hey, I got wide distribution here. So that gives them a level of confidence, especially if they're not familiar with podcasting. They're not going to know that everybody's really listening on iTunes most of the time. But you want to let them know you have wide distribution. You also want to highlight your accomplishments. If you have been podcasting for, say, a couple of weeks, and you get into New and Noteworthy, you want to let them know, hey, I made it into New and Noteworthy. If you've had a record number of downloads within a certain period of time, hey, I had 5,000 downloads during my first 30 days. If you have just any other type of accomplishments, my podcast downloads are doubling each week. It could be 2 to 4, but it doubled. So if you have those type of statistics that you can share with them, share it. It is funny but it's very true. If it's small, hey, if it's true, don't lie. Be very honest about it. But what you're doing here is when you open up with the compliment, you're dealing with something from a more emotional level. So for people who will connect with that, especially people who have verbal affirmations as their love language, that's going to hit with them. So you want to start off with something that's emotional, but when you get down to the latter part of your pitch, you're talking numbers. And so people who are more interested in numbers, they're going to relate to that particular aspect. They're going to see, oh, this person has this reach, oh, they're doing this, and that may be something that's important to them. So you can appeal to different people with different types of personality triggers. You also want to set proper expectations in that email. You want to let them know how long the interview is, what platform you use to record the interview. You want to make sure you have that aspect laid out so that they're fully aware before they schedule. And last but not least, you want to make sure you include a link to schedule the interview. It's amazing how many people will do this back and forth email thing to schedule an interview, and I'm like, no, put a link in there. This is the times that I'm available. Either you can schedule for one of these times or you can't. And you make it that simple, they can go in and schedule and that's it, versus going back and forth trying to negotiate a date and time that's going to work for both of you. Now you can make exceptions, but that should be after they've looked at your schedule and said, you know what, I can't make these times. Do you have any other flexibility? And then you can address that at this time. But I'll tell you that I do my interviews Mondays and Tuesdays between 6:30 and 8:30. That's all. Usually, I may make some exceptions, but I haven't made a lot. I made one for Mark, because he's in England. So I was like, I have to make an exception for him. So I've made some exceptions, but not a lot. So people will make themselves fit into that schedule, and I don't get a lot of people who actually ask for exceptions. So don't be afraid to set those parameters. So next I'm going to talk about chasing influencers. Ooh, how exciting. Everybody wants to have an influencer on the show, right? Why? Because you want to leverage their popularity. And the expectation is that you're going to grow your audience because you've had this particular person on your show. First and foremost, you have to realize that it's not a secret. They all know why you want them on the show. So they know when that email comes in, they know exactly what the agenda is. So it's not a secret. And two, you want to realize that these individuals do multiple interviews a week. And I'm going to use Pat Flynn as my example for the next couple of slides. He does interviews every week, and I'm going to throw out a number. I don't know this for sure. Say he does 10 interviews a week for other shows. That's 40 interviews a month. So what if, just say, 5 of those went live on each Monday? That's 5 podcast interviews that you are expecting him to share with his community every week. Don't you think that kind of gets oversaturated? So people have that expectation that, hey, I'm gonna get this influencer on my show, and then they're gonna share it with their people. They do a lot of interviews, and they're not gonna be able to share every single interview that they do. But you also have to realize that because they do so many interviews, they're telling the same stories over and over and over again. And I'm a Pat Flynn fan, but seeing his name does not make me run, because I already know that he was an architect, he got laid off, he was blogging to study for an exam. I already know that stuff. So if that's what you're going to talk to him about, I'm not interested in hearing it. So you have to also realize that as your audience want to hear another duplicate interview about this particular person, does your audience really want that? So you have to take that into consideration as well. And so you want to just really weigh the pros and cons of really chasing influencers and whether or not that particular interview is going to bring value to you and your podcasting audience. And so on to the next slide. I'm going to talk to you about pitching influencers, but not from personal experience, because to be honest, for those reasons previously mentioned, I've never pitched an influencer because I already know the answers to some of those questions, and I haven't thought of any new questions I want to ask. So I'm not making that move to interview any of them because I don't know what I want to talk to them about. I actually prefer talking to people that a lot of other people don't know anything about. So what I've done here is I've curated some experiences from people that I know, because they have pitched influencers and they've been able to get these individuals on their show. So the very first thing you want to do is start with building relationships. That can be starting with email communication. That can be social media exchanges, corresponding and talking to them via social media. That can mean buying their products or services, joining their Facebook groups. You want to start building relationships. And Michelle Talbert, who's sitting there in the back, she interviewed Pat Flynn on her show, and if my memory is serving me correctly, their email communication started a year?
Yeah, about 7 or 8 months before we actually did the interview.
Before the actual interview. So she's very much focused on building relationships. That is something that she does. She used that with this particular guest. So she started building that relationship long in advance of doing that interview. And not to say that you have to go that long, that has to be something that's based on you and what your strategy is, but you want to start with building relationships first and foremost. Because when they get that email finally asking for that interview, they're going to be more familiar with who you are versus getting it cold from someone they've never even seen their name before. So building that relationship first starts warming things up. The cold market is a complete stranger. The warm market may be somebody that's separated via a few degrees. You know, maybe you've heard of them, maybe familiar with them. It warms it up when you start communicating and building those relationships. The next thing you want to do is you want to be original. And like I said, there are people who will do these interviews and they give the same responses, the same story, and they're pitched with those same opportunities. And they do them, I don't know why all the time, but they do them. But when they get presented with an opportunity to do a podcast that's a little different, it piques their interest. And that's what Ramona Rice, who's also sitting in here, she interviewed Pat Flynn as well, but she talked to him about sports. Pat talks to business podcasters all the time about business. He never talks about sports, and he's athletic. So he has a passion and an interest for sports. So she was able to talk to him about all kinds of stuff on her show that was sports related. So she was able to have an influencer on her show, but she was able to talk to him about something totally different. So not only does that stick out in his mind, because that's something very different from his past interview experiences, but that's something new for his audience as well, because they learned things about him that they did not know about. So you want to be original. So here are some examples. Say, for example, you have a fitness podcast, and you're used to talking to all the fitness gurus in the industry. Consider having someone on your podcast that may be a business podcaster, because there are a lot of business podcasters who are into health and fitness. So you have someone that has a certain level of notoriety, but they're not usually on fitness podcasts, but they have that notoriety, and vice versa. If you are a business podcaster and you're used to talking to online entrepreneurs, consider having someone from the fitness industry on, because they do have a business. So they have their own fitness business. You can talk to them about that particular aspect of their business, and they don't usually get on and talk about business. They're usually talking about fitness when they get interviewed. So consider crossing over different categories so that you can still find influencers, but you're talking to them about something completely different. And the last thing I want to share with you is something that is more of a personal opinion, and I just believe that you should get a little bit of experience under your belt before you start reaching out to influencers. One, because you're going to have kinks that need to be worked out. I had a kink on my show with a audio issue, and that had a sound that was coming up during my interview episodes that I didn't know where it was coming from. I couldn't hear it during the actual interview. I heard it after the fact. Embarrassing, extremely, because I felt bad for my guests, because there was this noise that kept creeping up, and that may have turned some listeners off. But what would have been worse is if it had been someone who was considered an influencer, not because they're any different than any of my other guests, but when you have an influencer on your show, you tie these expectations to it. So if I had these high hopes for this interview and then it comes out sounding like crap, it's gonna make you feel even worse. So I'm glad that I got that figured out, one, but you don't wanna have those types of mistakes happening with someone who's an influencer, because it's really gonna just probably make you feel double bad. Compared to someone else. Like I said, no difference between people, but it's just a matter of managing those expectations when you do decide to reach out to an influencer. But it also shows that person that you are committed to podcasting. Podcasting is the flavor of the month. Everybody wants to start a podcast, but not everybody realizes how much work it is. So there are going to be people who start a podcast, try to get all these influencers, and then they may die off in 3 months. They decide, okay, this is too much work, I'm not going to do it. So when the influencer is researching you as a podcast host, they can look at how long you've been podcasting. So they see that, oh, this person has been podcasting for a while, okay, they're sticking with it. Then they can actually go listen to your show. So this is the question, do you want them listening to episode 30 or episode 3? Because I can tell you my episode 3 didn't sound too good. Episode 30 sounds much better. You're much more polished. You're asking better questions. So you get, and they know this. If you're interviewing a podcaster, they know that those first 10 episodes are going to sound like crap. They can listen to your latter episodes where you do sound better. You're more polished. You're more experienced, and they can base their decision on that. So that's the next thing. So you want to butter them up. You know how you're always buttering up people, especially when you're trying to get that date. Oh, I'll do this for you. I'll do that for you. So that's all about butter. But when you get the date, you kind of have this cigarette moment, right? I got it. I did my interview. It's all over with, right? But it's not. It's not over. you want to start asking for feedback. And I do this immediately, something that I've implemented. After I turn off the recorder, my first question is, what feedback do you have for me up until this point? And I do get feedback. Sometimes people don't have any feedback, but I do get immediate feedback from that I can then jot down to implement or at least consider in the future. But then I send out a survey periodically. And this gives them an opportunity to give me an anonymous feedback. So if they didn't feel comfortable talking to me directly about what they thought, this gives them an opportunity to share their thoughts anonymously. And the reason why you want to do this is because, one, they give you an idea of what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong, but it also shows what they may tell to their friends. So if they know of someone that may be a potential guest, oh yeah, I had a bad experience with that show. You don't want to be on that show. Well, I had a great experience. She's very professional. She's organized. Everything went great. So you get an idea of what type of feedback they may be sharing with other people. And then again, if they do give you feedback, it lets you know what you need to adjust. One thing for me is I kept getting people who said, I wish you would send me the topics or questions in advance. And I was like, okay, I do have a link for that on the scheduling page, but it's something that apparently gets overlooked. So now I'm gonna make that change, and I'm just gonna put it all on one page. So when you go to schedule your interview, I'm gonna put all that stuff at the top and the link to schedule at the bottom, so that you at least have to go through some of that stuff before you actually schedule, versus putting the schedule at the top and then just links at the bottom. I'm gonna actually embed the information in that page versus making a link to send them somewhere else. Because I do have the information, but it was easily overlooked. So you pick up on that feedback, even if it's something that you were really doing, it helps you realize that maybe you weren't making it clear for people where they can find the information. So that's something you definitely want to do. And last but not least, you want to promote the interview. You do that via social media, so you're sharing it, kind of like Ramona said in her presentation. You want to share it via social media, not just the day of, the week of, but for weeks and months to come. You also want to refer back to it in other episodes. So if you have a particular guest who stood out for whatever reason, refer back to them in future episodes, so that someone who's new to your podcast and they're listening to episode 50, they can go back to episode 25 and check that one out. So that, because they may not want to start at the beginning. So you refer back to it. If you're being interviewed on other people's podcasts, pitch your guests. If they've said something that's been inspirational, something that stands out, instead of you tooting your own horn the whole time, take a moment to toot their horn and say, you know what, I had this guest and they did this. Or then you can do that when it comes to content that you create. If you're writing blog posts, writing books, or whatever, continue to promote and share the great wisdom that your guests have shared with you, because this shows them that you are continuously supporting them. And then you also let them know, you know what, if you need me to share or promote anything that you're working on, let me know. I had one of my guests that was running a contest in an effort to build up his email list. He was giving away like a gazillion books. I referred to it on the show, I tweeted it. I did those things to continuously support that person. And the reason why this is important is because your future guests will see how you treat your past guests. So if they don't see you promoting your past guests, what makes them think you're going to promote them? You can say that you're going to do it, but if they don't actually see you doing it, then that says, oh, this person is just feeding me a load of bull. So you want to actually be doing it because your past guests will see it, your future guests will see it, but your past guests will remember that. And again, that goes back to them talking to other people about your podcast and about their experience as a guest on their show. So that is all I have for you guys. I don't know how I did with my time. Oh, I rocked it. Yes. So I am fully open for questions. Cheryl?
You did a great job, by the way.
Thank
in
you.
the follow-up, you had me on your show a few months ago. I can't remember. It all runs together. But I loved your process, the way you did what you just said. And I don't know if it's after you did some revision, but the questions are there and the scheduling. So I want to ask you what scheduling process you use. Is it, it was an online thing, I think, right?
I currently use setmore.com. It's free, so I look for free options where I can. And so I use setmore.com, and the reason why I chose this particular platform is because, one, they will send out a reminder email if they don't run into a glitch. Sometimes people say, I didn't get my reminder, I didn't get a reminder. Some people do. So that's sometimes can be a little buggy, but it is free. But you can set it up, you know, it takes some setting up in terms of, because you can use it for like actual scheduling for business purposes. Like if you're doing a consultation and somebody needs to pay you for something, it can be used for purposes like that. But I have it set up for the podcast where it says it's free. And I use that to actually schedule everything, and they do send out a reminder, and you can set how far in advance you want that reminder email to go out to the guest.
That's great, thank you.
Have you had repeat guests, and if so, do you think there's value?
I haven't had any repeat guests to date. I had one person that I considered having as a repeat guest, but I haven't actually made it happen. The reason I've changed my podcasting format since I started. I used to kind of do entrepreneurs and kind of like subject matter experts in certain topics. And so I had people that kind of toed the line between the two. But since I've switched to just solely talking to entrepreneurs who have successfully escaped the cubicle, unless they're going to tell me a little bit of a different story, at this point I don't think I have a need to really revisit anybody unless I choose to do something very specific with that episode. I know John Lee Dumas will do multiple interviews with the person, but usually that second time around, they're talking about maybe that a specific venture that person is working on at the moment versus going through the whole what's your name, how did you get started kind of stuff. So that's something I may consider, but I haven't really gotten to that point yet where anybody has that kind of thing going on. Any other questions? No? No questions? All right, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Woo!